Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
And welcome to Cahnmanns Current Events Roundtable. Today I have a wonderful guest, and I'm so happy that he said he would come to the show to share what he's been dealing with since he was a little boy. And my guest is James Williams, and we're going to be talking about living with autism, which James has had since he was born, and his struggles. But one of the things that I'm very proud, I've read his books, especially Out to Get Jack. He's an author, and he is a speaker, and he goes around all over the United States speaking about autism. Very nice to have you on my show. James, it's really exciting for me, and I'm going to read a little bit about you. That's somebody that was out to get Jack. This is the main book that James has written. James has written also the HAL experiment, and he's also written for younger children. Do you see it? Okay, I think I got it upside down. Here it is. Okay. And then he's also written When Gary Comes Home to Play for younger children. And I'm sure the next time I see James, there'll be more books on this table. And I read his last book, and it was really, really good. And I just want to read something that Annabelle Staley, she wrote, who is the author of The Sound of a Miracle, a child's triumph over autism, and she wrote about James. I have known James Williams most of his life, and I have seen him transform from a shy 5-year-old into a thoughtful, articulate teenager. What he has to say about children who struggle with immense disabilities is valuable, not only to families who must struggle alongside them, but to teachers and professionals who endeavor to understand them. And Out to Get Jack demonstrates that we all have a lot to learn, and gifted thinkers such as Jack can help us, show us our way. And in this book, James, there were things about it that was possibly a little about you and how you had to deal with autism and people accusing you of doing the negative things when it wasn't your fault. And I know that you show that in the book. I know it's a book it's a novel. It's a short novel, but it's very well put together, and it shows you the struggles of socially being people accepting you the way you are, and getting people think you're the one that gets in the trouble when you're not, and unable to tell people in your way that it wasn't about you. Talk about autism and what it was like growing up. You live in the North Shore in Chicagoland area, and tell what it was like as an autistic child in the North Shore. What were the positive things and negative things that you had to struggle with?
Well, one thing I just want to mention is that although I spent much of my childhood growing up in the North Shore, it's not where I was born. I was born in New York City. And I was diagnosed with autism in New York City at the age of 3. And my family realized that at the time there wasn't a lot of awareness about autism or services for kids with autism in New York. So my family decided they wanted to leave New York and find a place that in their eyes, had that better awareness. And my father, who'd grown up in the suburbs of Chicago as a child and also in the city proper for a while, basically told my mother, well, maybe I can take a look and see if there's a place in the North Shore where we can move to. So right around the time I turned 4, my family and I, we moved to the North Shore. And we moved here because my parents felt that there'd be better autism awareness. And while the services weren't entirely perfect here at the time, there was awareness. My parents, growing up, they found organizations that understood autism. They found support groups. My mother and father both found friends that understood what it was like to have a kid with autism. So for the most part, one thing that defined my childhood growing up was my parents facilitating friendships with me. My parents were very active in finding kids in the community. They
sound very supportive.
They were supportive, and as a child, they were very, very big on finding other kids that I'd get along with, and also speaking up for me in an area where, while many of the local schools weren't perfect in understanding autism, they felt that this was a place where they could be supported, speaking up for me. So that was pretty much sums it up.
Maybe you could tell some of our viewers what is autism and what it is that you struggle with. I know there's certain things like, social activities, being part of groups, and it's a developmental disorder characterized, as it says in Wikipedia, social interaction, communication, repetitive behavior. And these are some of the things that are, that people struggle with. There's different types of autism: high functioning, lower functioning, maintaining friendships. What was it like for you? What was some of the things that you noticed that were different about you that other people didn't have, so to speak? Did you see anything that you saw that you could do or could not do that other people were able to do?
Well, one thing you have to remember is that autism, although it has a very scientific definition, which you mentioned here, a lot of people with autism experience it differently. So to ask someone what is autism, you'd get a different answer if the person had one part of the autism spectrum, if the person was a clinician, a parent. And in fact, at many autism conferences, a lot of people will have panels and not kind of have a universal agreement as to what autism is. It's kind of similar to that famous line that the old Hollywood actor Cary Grant famously said, "Everybody would like to be Cary Grant, so would I." And I kind of feel like, autism is the same way. A lot of people define autism, but there really is no one set definition for autism. There's just many similar definitions. But the one thing that most people would agree on when asked what is autism is that autism is a disability or a disorder that is comprised of many social issues. Kind of like the hallmark symptoms of autism are the social issues. And I can tell you, although I was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3 in New York, my parents didn't actually disclose to me I had autism until I was 8, long after I'd moved to the North Shore, specifically the town of Northbrook. But before the age of 8, I had pretty much figured out I was different. I noticed kids acted differently. I noticed that there were things they could do I couldn't. I noticed that I was getting disciplined a little more than other kids. That there's things that my parents expected me to know socially that I didn't. And I had just concluded, because I really didn't know any better, that kids just suffered, that suffering was just part of a child's life, because I often felt like I was suffering. Here I was getting lectured, punished, sent to my room and disciplined for things when I really didn't understand what was so wrong about certain things that I did while other kids did.
Like, for instance, could you give me an example of something?
Probably one hallmark example that not just demonstrates the struggles people with autism have, it also demonstrates communication issues. I was flying with my father out to Denver for a mini vacation. And at the time, every other time I'd flown an airplane, my father and I had our own row to ourselves. And I didn't realize that people would share rows of seats with strangers. That was a routine occurrence. In fact, my parents had even told me, never talk to strangers, as often children are told growing up.
Right.
So here I go on this flight out to Denver, and there's a stranger sitting on our row. And I'm thinking, my parents told me, never talk to strangers, and here I'm supposed to be friendly to a stranger. So I thought, well, if he's a stranger, and I'm not supposed to be talking to strangers, this guy is a thief. He's a jerk and a thief because he's taking our space. So I openly said to my father, do we have to sit next to that jerk? Now, I thought I was standing up for my father and I right to sit in that space. The problem, though, was that he was African American, so he thought I was being racist, when in reality, I wasn't even thinking in those terms. I was just a small child. I was thinking in terms of, what's this person doing here?
In your row.
In our row, and why is my father asking me to talk to a stranger when my parents and Barney told me on TV, never talk to strangers?
See, so you're not, as an autistic child, you weren't able to differentiate the difference.
Yeah.
Normally, when somebody says don't talk to a stranger, they mean somebody comes up to you in the schoolyard or something, you're walking home and, to be careful, never talk to strangers, get into somebody's car. But you didn't see that it was okay because they were sitting next to you in an airplane. It was okay, so it wasn't the same thing. So it's hard to differentiate between what you're talking about, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And say somebody that doesn't have autism, they would know that immediately.
Yeah, and see, that's probably one of the hardest things that people with autism deal with, although the details may differ in different parts of the country where social rules often are going to be different. Probably the one common social struggle we see in autism is the inability to differentiate different social contexts and how rules apply in different places. And, I really feel bad for my dad because at the time, I really didn't know how to communicate that to him. And although my dad, at the point he understood I had autism, he realized a misunderstanding was occurred, he really didn't understand because I couldn't communicate to him why I said that. And I really feel bad because I was never really able to communicate why I said that until two to 3 years after it happened. And so I feel bad that I left my dad out on that lurch, but I realized it was really due to social anxiety I had back then, and I profusely apologized when I explained to him what happened. And he, when I explained that to him, understood what was going on. He knew it was a misunderstanding, but now he understood why. And this is why, if there's any parent watching this right now, one thing I tell parents is, find a way to communicate with your child. Because oftentimes, when they behave in a way that upsets you or is inappropriate, there's probably some reason that the child might be thinking in their head to justify their disability or to justify their behavior because of their disability or autism that you might not understand but might be logical in the eyes of the child.
And they see it only. It's funny because we were at the Bluegrass having lunch today, which was so delicious, by the way. I was noticing you were showing me eye contact. And a lot of the kids that I know that have autism, people that I do know that have autism, they could be on different levels. We have family members that is on the spectrum of autism, and you taught me today that Asperger's is now part of the autism spectrum. There's no longer Asperger's, everything is under autism. And you were mentioning that to me, and you showed me eye contact, and even right now you're expressing with eye contact, and you said that you had to learn to do that. Remember, it wasn't something that was easy for you right away. People with autism doesn't always show. A lot of times when they're speaking, they will speak to you, they'll talk to you without even, just looking down, looking sideways, and not really showing, and I see that you can express it. Was that hard for you to learn that technique? Well, and how did you learn that? Did somebody teach it to you? How did you, when you were learning, somebody had to?
Well, one of the things that that is not always understood, and the educational consultant, Dr. Richard Lavoie, the creator of the educational awareness to how difficult can this be. He describes it a lot better than I would, so I'm just going to adapt my explanation from him. One of the things he points out is that there are two types of tasks that many professionals delineate. There are what he calls tasks that you can do while doing something else, multitask tasks, and then there are cognitive tasks. And a cognitive task is something that you can't focus on anything else. You have to have your entire brain power on while you're doing it. And he gives an example of, it's the difference between driving on a sunny day and driving during a hurricane. Now, if you're driving during a hurricane, you probably can't necessarily talk to other people while you're driving through that hurricane.
Right.
And so when you have autism, a lot of things that most people can do while they're multitasking are cognitive tasks for a person with autism. So one of the reasons why people with autism struggle with eye contact is because since the etiquette in conversation takes a lot more brain power than a person who's not autistic, they might have to spend so much energy thinking in their head, is this an appropriate thing for me to say? Am I saying the right thing? That they don't have the energy or brain power to make eye contact and consciously think about those things. Because one big difference between people with and without autism is that there's a lot of social behavior that's instinctive to a non-autistic person. When you have autism, it's not instinctive. They have to consciously remind themselves to behave in those ways. So what enabled me to understand eye contact was make me realize, okay, eye contact may be hard for me, but if I want to maintain a good relationship with a person, not necessarily a dating relationship, if I want to maintain that good social standing, then eye contact is something I have to constantly remind myself alongside those appropriate social cues and also appropriate things to say. And it was realizing when I was motivated to maintain those good terms that I was finally able to remember, okay, make that eye contact. About 10 years ago, there was a pop song recorded in Sweden called What's in It for Me. Although that song was really was a song written by a wunderkind, a young Swedish pop star named Amy Diamond, and that was in the context of relationships. A lot of people with autism often kind of think that way, what's in it for me? If I'm making eye contact and spending all this energy doing so, am I going to get something in return? Am I going to get your acceptance? Am I going to get that respect? And it was figuring out that there was something in it for me that was worth maintaining that brain power that ultimately enabled me to realize, hey, eye contact's an important thing.
Yeah, because it makes the other person feel that what you're saying is acceptable. Because when you're talking to somebody and they're not looking at you, you think, oh my God, I must be boring to them that they don't even want to pay attention. And also, it's for you, it gives credibility of what you're saying. So I think eye contact is, and it's very good that whoever taught that to you, it was a wonderful thing that they did, because it makes you feel like it makes me feel that you're accepting me and I'm understanding you much better. Also, I just want to, we talked about, you said it's something, we currently live in a political climate here in the U.S. that is polarizing. How is our current political climate impacting people with autism in America?
Well, one of the things that I think is very important for people to understand is the fact that everything, for the most part, really is contextual. So like even with eye contact, we talk a lot about eye contact deficiencies in autism, but there are even social contexts where eye contact is not always part of the interaction. I remember when I first went to high school and I learned from some very wise friends that in today's high schools, teenagers don't necessarily give eye contact with each other because they often will look at their phones while they're talking, and that's actually not them being rude to each other. That's just how teenagers interact. I remember first getting upset when I was in high school and made some of my first friends, and I noticed they weren't looking at me. They were looking at their phones while talking to me, and one of them had to let me know, hey, don't get upset because we're not using eye contact. This is just what teenagers do.
Right. But can you address the current political climate impacting, because we don't have that much time. I can't believe we have 10 minutes left. But
that was actually supposed to lead to this question.
Yes, okay.
One thing people who get to know me well know that I'm I'm kind of a master of the Simpsons-style non sequitur delivery. Every Simpsons episode starts with a opener that's different than the story. So the point of mentioning the cell phones was actually to lead to this.
Okay.
Lead to this. And a lot of people with autism will make those connections that not others have. So the connection here is just like, eye contact and everything is contextual. A lot of times, political issues often mean something very different in the autism context than they do in the context of mainstream America. And one thing I learned when I was invited to attend a political convention related to autism is that currently, we think of polarization in terms of Democrats and Republicans. And oftentimes, the Democrats are hardwired to disagree with everything the Republicans want and vice versa. But what I learned at that event is that there are policies that Democrats support and policies that Republicans support that can mean something very different in the context of autism. And so one thing I realized is that although this convention was comprised of Democrats and Republicans, we all connected at that event over certain policies that both parties support.
Such
as an example. A lot of people respect President Obama for the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which is very much a Democratic thing. The Democratic Party's been for that. But the truth is, there were some parts of the Affordable Care Act that negatively impacted some families of individuals with autism. And although a large number of families of individuals with autism often are helped by social service programs and welfare programs the Democratic Party has historically supported, a lot of people got very upset who were in the autism community because the Affordable Care Act did some things that really hurt many of those families. So now you have a political dilemma. On one hand, a lot of policies the Democratic Party supports helps people with autism, but not many people in that party were willing to accept that certain parts of the Affordable Care Act hurt many of those families. But it works both ways because a lot of the right-to-work programs that are busting unions that Republicans support, a lot of the cuts to social service and welfare that Republicans support also hurt a lot of families impacted with autism too. So I think one of the issues is that we have a political climate that is so much focused on Democrat versus Republican, it's really ignoring communities like the autism community that can be caught in the middle of those fights and can be caught in the middle of the fact that these policies are based on party ideologies that can help or hurt certain people in the middle.
And so what is it as far as our people, you said something at lunch today that a lot of times you can't, if you work, then you lose your benefits. That's one of the things that's been hard on the community, which is children with disabilities. It's really healthy for them to work. It's good. They have something to look forward to. But then you said something, the fact if they work, then their benefits can be cut.
Well, absolutely. And just a quick disclaimer before I give this explanation. This is more of an explanation where I'm trying to describe some of the current struggles we have now. This is not in any way meant to be necessarily a statement against people working, but one of the issues that's emerging and what's sad is that this is an issue that isn't being necessarily discussed by either political party, is that when a person gets disability benefits, they often get health insurance coverage. They often get certain other benefits like more housing that's more affordable because people on disability benefits can go into more affordable apartment rentals. There's certain treatments that require you to have disability benefits to get. You get reduced fares on public transportation, which a lot of people need with disabilities who cannot drive. And there are these hidden benefits where life is made more affordable when you're on those benefits. However, oftentimes when you're on benefits, there's limits to how much you can work. And one thing people don't realize is that on paper, it says, oh, you can work a certain hours and you don't lose your benefits. While you don't lose your benefits as a whole, the moment you start working in practice, you do lose some of your benefits. And sometimes that partial loss can often result in people losing certain health coverage, certain medical treatments that they rely on through their benefits. One specific example I can think of here locally in Highland Park was, in Highland Park there's this great company called Aspiritech. They've helped create jobs for many.
Yeah, I just learned about it today, and they hire people that are autistic. And that's really, and one of the reasons because the person that owns the company, their own child has autism, and so they made it available. They're hiring people with autism, and I think that's remarkable. And
although this company, they've helped create many jobs, and adults with autism have actually moved to the North Shore from other parts of the country to work there. One of the sad things they've realized, though, is that some of their workers, because they lost disability benefits, lost some of their essential health coverage to maintain some of the services they needed as adults. And so what the heads of Aspiritech are trying to do is find ways to maintain their cause of employment, but also work with service providers so that if they hire someone, that person isn't worse off because they lost some necessary health coverage.
So this is something that we really have to see. Most people don't know what people with disabilities, what they have, and what could happen if they work or they even get married. They can lose their benefits. I know a cousin of mine whose child has autism, and she was afraid to get married because she was afraid that if she got married, her daughter would lose her benefits. And it should be just the opposite. You know, they should be able to get married. People should be able to work and still maintain their benefits. And it's not like this. I mean, we were talking at lunch, and I was really surprised at some of the things that you told me, because most of the viewers, most of our public, they don't really realize that this is the situation, that can really happen for people. And what can people in the North Shore do in order to improve the quality of life for residents with autism? Do you have any ideas what we can do for you?
I think one of the first things that people here locally have to realize is that instead of devolving into the partisanship politically, when we're looking at the political views of local candidates, when we go and vote in the midterm election in November, we shouldn't just look at a person's views based on their allegiance to one party or another. We need to look at what are the unintended consequences that many policies politically have emerged. I'm just going to give a quick example. When I mentioned that the Affordable Care Act had negative repercussions, that was probably not the intent of the Obama administration. What happened was, when the Affordable Care Act mandated that people pay a penalty for being uninsured, what was not anticipated is that a lot of families of kids with autism are actually uninsured because many health insurance policies do not cover the essential therapies or treatments that kids with autism need. So you have middle class and wealthy uninsured families with autism. They're uninsured because they had to pay out of pocket for their kids' therapies. And now the Affordable Care Act is saying because you're insured, you have to pay this penalty. And these families were unfairly targeted and had to pay this penalty when they already were struggling financially paying these out-of-pocket treatments.
Well, I think you should run for office. I think you would be a perfect candidate. We have only a little bit of time, but you would be the type of candidate that you would be advocate for autistic children, autistic adults. I mean, you would be terrific, James. I hope you're thinking about it someday, because we need people like you. We need people that think about other people, people that experience them themselves. And you really need to be an advocate. You have to be there, and I know you go around and you lecture, and I hope that you're getting through to some of these candidates on both sides, Republicans, Democrats, Libertarian, every candidate there is, and you need to show them and tell them what, people with autistic people and people living with autism, what it's really about. And I want to thank you. I want to invite you again to come and be a guest of my show, because we're just slightly hit a lot of things that we need to be done on this show on autism. Again, thank you very much for being here. And I hope that this program will improve the lives of people, will help them understand there's many different things that they can do. There's societies. I think Autism National, the Autism Society, there's another one?
Absolutely. And I'm just going to close basically by saying, know the unintended consequences of what you're supporting.